Thank you so much for having me tonight. I wish I am there physically. I know New York. I lived in New York for many years, so I feel like one of you. I know the International Action Center and the Workers' World and the party and the comrades in New York. So I really feel like I want to be with you physically. So I'm sorry for speaking via phone or Skype. But I want to begin by saluting all of you. And on behalf of Comrade Ahmed Saadat and the Palestinian political prisoners, to salute through you, Comrade Mumia Abu Jamal, and all the political prisoners in U.S. jails. And we demand their immediate freedom, and we support them fully and unconditionally. And we feel that our struggle, and we know that it's one and it's against the same enemy and for the same goals. And also, before I begin to speak about the situation in Palestine, I would like to reaffirm our position on the support of the people of Venezuela and the revolution and the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela. We stand with the people of Venezuela, and we have issued this position through deeds and words in our solid stand with the people of Latin America and at the forefront in Cuba and in Venezuela. The situation in Palestine, as you may know and you're following, I'm sure, the Israeli state system is speeding up their more and more of the same. So they're building the colonies and grabbing lands and confiscating Palestinian lands in the West Bank. And I'm sure you're following their also measures in demolishing Palestinian homes in Jerusalem and trying to change the status quo of the situation by adopting a more right-wing fascist policy, competing Israeli right-wing parties competing between each other, who can be more brutal against Palestinian people in order to cash votes, especially at the time of Israeli elections. And this is something that we know, and we have experienced this at every time the Israeli colonial settler system try to impose its conditions on the Palestinian people. They also today are waging not just war and aggression against our people in Gaza, but also trying to implement a full siege against our people in Gaza. And the situation today in Gaza is more difficult than it has ever been before. However, our people still engaged in Gaza in a wide popular resistance movement and building the military might and resistance of Palestinian resistance. And this is very important that in Gaza today we have a strong Palestinian resistance despite the siege and despite all the conditions that they try to impose against our people. The resistance in Gaza, day after day, is mounting and getting more popular support, particularly by the youth and the students. And we have been, our people there have been engaged in the Great March for Returns for almost 10 months now. And this is important also because as they are trying to pass these conditions on our people to accept a compromise at the expense of the Palestinian people rights. We see that Palestinians have a consensus across Palestinian political trends in rejecting the so-called deal of the era, this Trump administration plot to buy more times for Israel in order to continue the colonialist policy on daily basis. And today, there is not even a slightest difference, not even in words, between U.S. policy and the Israeli policy. They are very upfront about it. The American ambassador in Israel, David Friedman, he lives in one of the colonies. He advocates for building settlements. He is inciting against our people and every time he speaks about the Middle East and the conflict. So we used to always say that, and we still do say that our struggle is not just against the colonialist apartheid state of Israel, but it is also against imperialism led by the United States. And this is very important today to reaffirm this position. The United States will never be an honest broker between any two people or any two nations, and we are seeing by experience after experience that the U.S. is leading the war of aggressions and interventions against the Arab world and against the region and worldwide. Well, I want to focus just a little bit tonight on the resistance that has been going on in Israeli prisons. As you know, there are over 5,000 Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli jails. Now, our prisoner movement is not just people who are living inside jails and in cells. These are our leaders, our student leaders, and our women movement leaders, the labor movement leaders. We consider them the actual true leaders of our movement, not Mahmoud Abbas or the presidents or the ambassadors or the ministers. We consider our prisoners to be the legitimate leadership of our movement. And this is important because it is a stand that bypass all these fake illusions about what is a leadership. A leadership is not something that can be achieved through the mockery of some elections under occupation. They talk about Palestinians could have democratic elections, for example, under occupation. And this is an illusion. When we have experienced that in 2006, and when the pro-resistance blocs won the elections, we saw what happened. And today we are seeing this very much the same that is happening in Venezuela. You can win the elections, but the enemy will not accept these results. This game that the U.S. keep playing on the basis of the bourgeois democracy has failed. It failed in Chile during Allende time in 1973, and it's failing today in Maduro times, and it's failing also in the Palestinian. The leadership of the Palestinian movement today are in prisons, and they're in universities and colleges. They're in the factories. They are in Gaza leading the march to return and the Palestinian resistance. Today, the Palestinian fighters who are engaged in the resistance have been born, they were born after the signing of the Oslo Accord of 1993, when they said that there is a complete surrender ahead of Palestinians. Well, today we have 40,000 armed Palestinian fighters in Gaza. Every time Israel tried to invade Gaza, they couldn't. They couldn't because of the steadfastness of our resistance. And they tried in 2008 and 2011 and 12 and 2014, and they couldn't break the will of the Palestinian people and their resistance in Gaza. These are not just mere slogans. These are a reality and facts. Yes, Israel could inflict a lot of damage on our homes and schools and universities. Yes, Israel could impose embargo on our hospitals and prevent Palestinians from seeking treatment and medical treatment. They can do this because they are very powerful, and they can impose siege on Gaza. But what they cannot do is to impose a surrender, for us to accept any surrender or the occupation conditions, because our fight against this occupation was never about finding a solution or a state in the West Bank or Gaza. Our fight and our struggle has been always to liberate our people and to liberate our land and to liberate not just Palestinians, but everyone who lives in Palestine, building a real democratic socialist system in Palestine that can provide equality for all people, for Jews and Muslims and Christians and others. And because of this, because of these convictions and because of these principles, today Comrade Ahmed Sadat and his comrades are in prison. When Israel sentenced the General Secretary of the PFLP to 30 years in jail in December 2008, they couldn't provide one reason of why they could do that in their mockery courts. And the words of Comrade Ahmed Sadat in that court was very clear. He told the judge that I have stood on this very court many, many times, and the fact that you couldn't break my will from 1969 until today means that your occupation is a failure and your project is a failure. And you can send me to jail and to prison, but you will not be able to take away from us the will to fight for liberation and the will to fight for equality and for self-determination. That is the principles that today Palestinians are paying a very high price in prison cells because of these convictions. Sadat could say one sentence and he could be set free by the Israelis if he surrendered to their conditions. Just like Comrade George Abdullah, who's been in French prisons for over 35 years, holding on his principles, saying to the French authority that even if you keep me here until the last day of my life, I know that one day I will be carried out from these prison cells. It is this strength of Mumia Abu Jamal that is resisting these injustices that is happening on a daily basis in the United States, the police brutality and the racism. These political leaders, these prisoners, are the true, genuine representative of our struggle. These are the ones that we will march while trusting this leadership, because it is a leadership from the people. They look like the people. They are defending people's rights, and they're paying a very high price for these principles. And that's why it is important to uphold these icons today and say that even though we are a minority, but we are a revolutionary minority. And it's very important to remember that all the changes that happened in the world was carried by these revolutionary minorities who became victorious if they continue on the path of revolution, upholding people's rights and fighting for people's rights. It is difficult times today in the United States for our movement, for the Black liberation movement, and it is difficult times today for our movement in Palestine. Absolutely. We know that the camp of the imperialist Zionism and reactionary regimes are publicly coming together and saying that they are one camp and they have one strategy. The Saudi Arabia reactionary regime with the Zionist Israel regime and the United States are allies. They understand that they have to work together and they have to be united, and that in that they can win. Well, in the left, we should do the same and call for the unity of our movement against these imperialist and Zionist and reactionary regimes, from Yemen to Syria to Libya to Morocco to New York. We also understand that you are the one who's fighting a very difficult battle because you are in the belly of the beast. We know how tough your tasks is. We know how important also your struggle is. So for that, I will salute you and say to you that when we read the history of our movements, whether in the United States or whether in Palestine, and we draw the lessons from these histories, we know that bad times comes and good times comes, progress comes, and waves of revolution will come. But this, in order for us to play a role in that, we must read a very clear, present a very clear position. A position that is based on where do we stand in terms of class. And in Palestine today, we have a capitalist Palestinian class who are a few capitalists aligning themselves with the Israelis, with the occupation. This could have never been imagined 25 or 30 years ago, that some Palestinians will jail other Palestinians or will oppress them. But this happened. And it did not only happen in Palestine. It happened in Ireland, it happened in Algeria, it happened in other places in the world. When the bourgeois lead the movement and they surrender, they become tools of oppression, and they lead people into chaos, and they lead the revolution into surrender. That's why it's important that we understand today more than ever as Palestinians that the kind of leadership that we are looking for and we're fighting for is an alternative democratic revolutionary path. And that is a leadership from the workers, from the refugee camps, from the movement, and not from those who are counting on the crumbs that is thrown to them by the Saudi Arabia regime, the United States, and the state of Israel. And this is important. It is also important to realize that today, as Palestinian resistance, we are united. The forces of the resistance is united. You can imagine the kind of conditions that our people went through in Gaza. For the past 12 years, they've been under siege, and they are united, from Hamas to the PFLP to the Islamic Jihad to other major forces of the resistance. And we know that Israel is creating all these conditions in order for us to have a civil war, to fight each other, to kill each other, but our people with them and the resistance with them have turned this into an opportunity for unity and to say that we disagree with each other on issues, on social issues, political issues, but we are not going to fight each other or kill each other. We are going to fight united against Israel, and our internal issues, we will solve them in a responsible way. Unfortunately, the right wing of the movement, represented by Mahmoud Abbas and the Fatah movement, they want to lead us into a civil war. And the recipe for civil war is through this policy called the security cooperation with Israel. What does this mean, basically? Is the continuation of imprisonment of Palestinian youth, students, and members of the resistance. And Palestinian police agencies are doing this today on behalf of the Israeli occupation. And that's why this is a very, very important and crucial issue for us to end this security cooperation, because this is a Palestinian entity that Israel has been long time trying to establish under its own authority. A Palestinian entity that could do the occupation dirty job. A Palestinian entity that is completely security entity. And they tried this in 1968 and they failed, and they tried this in the 70s, early 80s, and they failed. But unfortunately, through the signing of the Oslo Agreement, they were able to establish this Palestinian entity that will never be able to become a Palestinian state. So today we are witnessing the end of the so-called two-state solutions. And the end of the two-state solutions means that the alternative to that, what the across Israeli right-wing and even left-wing parties they are advocating for the more of the same, imposing a system that has not been precedent in the past. So, for example, when we talk about the struggle of Palestinians, we found so much similarities between our struggle and the struggle of the people in South Africa. But it's not the same. There are similarities between our struggle and the struggle of Ireland, North Ireland. But it's not also the same. So that's why when we identify Israel, we call it a colonialist settler apartheid state, because it exists as a settler colonialist apartheid state. And there is no chance for Israel to survive as such. Israel is doomed to fail with this system. They will not reach anywhere. And Palestinians and all the free will of the people who lives in Palestine and fight against this racist system will be victorious. If not today, tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, next year. The most important thing is that we know now that this so-called two-state solution is done, and the alternative is the liberation of Palestine. I would like to just end by talk just a little bit about the situation that is surrounding today the Palestinian people, and that is the region. You know, today we can say without hesitation that this project of ISIS that was created by the United States and the Arab reactionary regime has been defeated in Syria. They were defeated in Syria. And Trump could lie every day about how much he fought ISIS. But we know that this is a completely lie, and that the people who fought ISIS and were victorious against ISIS is the people of Syria, is the Lebanese resistance, and it's the Palestinian resistance. We defeated ISIS, not Trump. And from the day one, we said that these Arab regimes must be changed through revolution, but through revolution and not through chaos, through revolution that provides a better alternative to the masses than these Arab regimes. And we see through experience what is happening, for example, today in Egypt. Because the mass demonstrations against a regime does not mean that we have a revolution. It's just a big demonstration. A revolution requires a leadership and a program and an alternative to the regimes, a revolutionary democratic alternative to the regimes. And they can claim today that they're having a revolution in Venezuela against an elected government and president, and the vast majority of the people of Venezuela voted for Maduro. But they can fabricate lies and pictures and reports of the CNN and Fox News and what have you, and claim that there is a real movement in Venezuela when there is not. This is exactly what happened in Egypt. Today, Egypt lives under the state of the generals and the military. Today in Egypt, there are 60,000 political prisoners in these generals' prisons. Today, Egyptians are living in fear because of the oppression and the brutality of the Egyptian regime. Today, Egypt is besieging Gaza. And today, the Egyptian regime is aligning itself with the most vicious reactionary regimes of all times, the Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. In the United States, they don't talk about Saudi regimes, and they don't talk about the United Arab Emirates until only recently, when they couldn't hide their crimes in Yemen. And this is due to the people who fought against this war. And I want to salute you, because I know that you have fought against these oppressions in Yemen, these wars in Yemen, these aggressions against the people of Yemen. And now, after hundreds of thousands of victims and thousands of children who were slaughtered in Yemen, today some of the U.S. representatives are trying to show, to fabricate, to lie, and to say that they are the one who wants to save Yemen, when they are the one who put Yemen into this bloodshed. We know, we understand this. They cannot lie. The people of Yemen knows this fact. The people of the region knows that. And despite all of this, and despite all of these aggressions and wars against Yemen, when Palestine calls for the people of Yemen, hundreds of thousands of Yemenis come out in the streets chanting for Palestine, because Palestine is still the issue, and Palestine is the issue, and Palestine is the issue of the Arab masses. We know that the liberation of Palestine does not solve only the plight and the suffering of the Palestinian people. The liberation of Palestine means the change of the entire region, means the defeat of U.S. imperialism, means another world in the Arab and Muslim world, and a different world. That's why our struggle is very difficult. If we were fighting only against Israel, we would probably defeated Israel a long time ago. But we are fighting against an imperialist system that is adopting Israel as its project. And this project is doomed to fail. And it will definitely fail. So I want to thank you for inviting me to your event tonight. I am sorry if I took more than what I should in my time, and I salute every one of you. Thank you very much.
Long live Palestine!
Yeah, I think that that's why I said it is difficult time, because struggle is difficult, especially when you are trying to change the reality and the conditions of the reality and change it upside down, 180 degrees. And so it is difficult and tough because we are facing a vicious enemy that is not compromising, doesn't believe in dialogue, doesn't believe in true, genuine debate. If that was the case, we would solve many, many of the problems of today's world. But the imperialist power and the reactionary powers wants to impose their will on people, and so that's why the struggle is very difficult and tough. And also, we have seen that victory could happen despite all the conditions. But we must understand that victory somewhere in Brazil, for example, could also happen the other way around. It could be a victory for the Zionists and for the imperialist power as well. Before that, in Latin America, we witnessed a wave of socialist movements trying to overcome a period of dictatorship and military dictatorship in particular. And today we see a reaction from these power of trying to suppress the achievements of these movements and send Latin America again into the era of the bloodshed and civil war and chaos. And so it is definitely tough times for us, the radical left, the revolutionary left, particularly. But at the same time, when you go out in the street today and you ask random people, would you prefer to live under democratic socialism, or would you like to live under capitalism? You will see more and more people looking towards socialism today more than before. And socialism has a positive connotation in the popular ears, and capitalism has a very negative connotation, and it is usually combined with greed and theft and war and violence, while socialism doesn't have this, I mean, to the normal people, to the average Palestinian, socialism is definitely a choice. Now, how do we materialize this? When we not shy away from talking about socialism. Unfortunately, many people in the left today, they don't want to talk about this. They are trying to come up with some kind of a compromise of who we are and what we want to be accepted by some system or the NGOs of today's world. But if we are honest with each other, what we want is the liberation of people and their resources and their wealth, and not everything in our past also is negative or wrong. We have a tradition as left in the world, and we should keep and uphold this history. If it wasn't for the socialists and the leftists and the revolutionaries of the 1930s and 40s and 50s, and all along the decades that followed, we wouldn't have many of the rights that people today enjoy. we don't claim it much. We should claim it because it has been done by the revolutionary left in the world, from Medicare to workers' rights to farmers' rights. It wasn't achieved because capitalists gave it to us. It was achieved with blood and sweat of the workers and the farmers.
Anyway, thank you for your really wonderful revolutionary analysis of Palestine and the world, the global struggle, really. Just a little intro to the question I have, and that is, it was mentioned, I believe, by Taryn, our previous speaker, about the solidarity that the Palestinian people showed towards the people of Ferguson, Missouri, after the murder of Michael Brown. And it was all over Twitter and Facebook, you know, the beautiful signs, you know, Palestine loves Ferguson, and, you know, all of that. And I was actually at a demonstration in St. Louis just months after Michael Brown was killed, and there was a beautiful Palestinian delegation at the rally, and it got such a tremendous applause and recognition from the black community, you know, in St. Louis, which is right next door to Ferguson. So my question to you is, what role do you see social media playing in terms of continuing to build a struggle, a solidarity struggle with the people of Palestine, and especially around the issue of the 5,000 political prisoners? Do you see a valuable role that social media can play, especially since so many, you know, young people are on social media now and get all their news from social media?
Okay, Teresa?
Yes.
Oh,
I could, yes, I could hear you clearly. The question is about the role of the social media in terms of Palestinian prisoners, particularly, and also the comments on the also relationship between the Palestinian struggle and the black struggle in the United States. And I think that it has been more and more clear for our movement the need to not just build a bridge in terms of fighting for the freedom of political prisoners or against racism and police brutality, but also to be able to draw a common strategy. Because if you remember the comments that were made by a black journalist in the United Nations who said Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Brother Markland, our people, all of a sudden, they start talking about Malcolm X and remembering the rich heritage of the Black Liberation movement and the relationship with Black Panthers, and this is important. I mean, as one Palestinian writer and martyr, Comrade Hassan Kanafani, said, you think a story ended until it begins again and one more time. And so we think that through using all social media and different ways of showing our struggle and the common struggles and the relationship between the movements around the world, only through this that we can bring back this heritage and not make it something from the past, but actual something that's still living and present. It's just present in a different generation, a new generation. And this is a big challenge. It requires more than social media. I think it requires a lot of also strategizing together. And it's difficult to probably today have a center-left kind of, or an international center for the left in the way that it existed before. But I think that the movement in the United States could also play that leadership role for our movements in general, because you're not just fighting against U.S. System, you are fighting on behalf of all of us. And so I think it's really important to link what's happening in Flint and in Ferguson and in other places of struggle to the struggle of Jabalia camp and Al-Hilwa camp and Al-Ghazza. When we talk about impersonation and the industrial prison complex and the military industrial complex, and we talk about Palestine, the very first issues that comes is that who is our natural allies as Palestinians? It's the black people, and it's the immigrants and the refugees, and it is the radical revolutionary left in the United States. These are our allies.
Just so good to have you here with us, and really, you've provided a global perspective linking Venezuela, Syria, Yemen, and really highlighted once again the significance of the Palestinian struggle as central to resistance on a global scale. I wanted to ask you, certainly also within Israel, there is a real greater brutality than ever before. Maybe if you think this is coming from more desperation, that the limits, many Israelis are seeing also the limits of the Zionist project, or if you see new layers of both solidarity and disenchantment among Israelis with Zionism, and how that also impacts the one-state solution. I don't know if that made sense.
Important question, because the Israel project have reached the peak, and today we have seen that when Israel tries to promote itself internationally, they say that we are the most strongest country in the Middle East. Of course, they always never mention their nuclear capacity because they're keeping this as a vague thing, you know. But they always try to promote how much they're strong and how much they have a military might, and how Israel is the advanced, you know, economy in the region, and how they are achieving a very, you know, high level of level of advancement in technology and what so on and so forth. And so if Israel is reaching this peak, then what is next for Israel? If Israel could today, for example, do what it's do and get away with it without any kind of international accountability, without any real resistance to its project, then what is next for Israel? What Israel is trying to do today is to set itself up as the leader of the reactionary, or what they call the moderate camp in the Arab world, which is the reactionary camp, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, including Jordan and Egypt. And Israel is setting itself to be the leader of this camp, trying to say that the next phase of Israel is to fight Iran, and that Iran is the enemy of the region and of democracy and of, you know, this and that. And turning the equation from Israel being the enemy of the people of the world, of the region, to Iran to be the enemy of the region. And they are feeling big time on this front as well, because we have seen changes in terms of the situation on the ground when it comes to the Arab resistance today. For example, Israel tried to invade and occupy South Lebanon in 2006, and they couldn't do that due to a very strong Lebanese resistance today. When we talk about the Lebanese resistance today, we are talking about a very strong resistance, and it's not a picnic for the Israeli army anymore to expand. So Israel is blocking itself with walls along Lebanon borders, along the Golan borders, with Gaza, with the Palestinians in the West Bank. They're just building walls around themselves. And Israel also is facing a strong Palestinian resistance in Gaza. We believe that the movement that could defeat Israel is not a state, but it is revolutionary and resistance movement. Israel cannot win a war against a Palestinian or an Arab resistance movement, but they can always win wars against states. Because when they're fighting an army, they are backed up by their allies, the United States and what have you. And they are fighting a government, and it's usually a government or an Arab state that it's under either a monarchy or an Arab bourgeois class. So they win all the time when they fight against Arab states, and they lose all the time when they fight against movements. So today, for example, the Lebanese resistance and the Syrian resistance, the Palestinian resistance, are advancing and accumulating experience on the ground, on the battlefield, and Israel is definitely worrying that its project will end at the hands of the people of the region and not of the states of the region. Because these states, unless they are changed by their own people to bring back, the image of Jamal Abdel Nasser and the, characters like Chavez and Fidel and, leaders who could build a revolution and build a state that can resist hegemony and imperialism. So Israel definitely today is trying to place itself as a major power in the region and trying to set itself as a leader of a certain camp in the region, but they are definitely trying to gain back the scars and the defeat that they suffered in 2006 in Lebanon and 2014 in Gaza. This is important. It's important to know today, for example, that Palestinian resistance, and it's not a secret that Palestinian resistance make its own weapons, from missiles to rockets to mortars to different kinds of weapons. It's made in Gaza, and it's Palestinian made, and we're very proud of it. We're not shying away from it, and I think they are acknowledging, for example, that the Lebanese resistance could hit Israel anywhere it wants in historical Palestine. And we understand the reality on the ground. It's not exactly the way Israel tried to show it. For example, only 9% of Palestine is inhabited by people. I mean, the vast majority of Palestine, historical Palestine, is there. And Palestine is not flying away. It's not going to go away. It's staying there. And and what I'm trying to say is that the Israeli society is moving more and more towards right-wing parties, because they think that this is the only way that they can survive as a state and as a project. And we see a very weak Israeli left. The reality is that we don't have real partners, if I may use this sentence, inside Israel in order to be part of the Palestinian resistance and fight Israel from within. There are individuals, there are few people here and there, there are journalists, but there is not yet a movement or a political party that could actually be a partner for the Palestinian resistance. But I think it is formulating. It is formulating in terms of, you know, today we see the many young Jewish students outside, you know, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, who's getting involved in the movement and especially in support of Palestinian people rights in the boycott movement, and they're playing a crucial role. And we see this as an alternative relationship to show in terms of the, you know, that our conflict is not based on a religious conflicts between Muslims and Jews, as Netanyahu and his cronies are always trying to promote. That this is a fight between Jews and Muslims. It was never between Jews and Muslims. It's not between Jews and Muslims, and it will never be between Jews and Muslims. It is between this colonialist and the people of Palestine. So Israel is reaching its peak, but they will start declining very soon.
This has been terrific. I have a question about Trump's new approach to the Zionist occupation of Palestine, his deal of the century, which you spoke about earlier. There are two broad analytical approaches to this thing. Some see it as a genuine attempt to impose a surrender, something that could be called a settlement or a final status agreement on the Palestinian people. Others see it as a strategy, a new strategy, to prolong and strengthen the status quo, because, as you said, the era of the two-state solution is at an end. The number of people who actually believe it will ever happen is approaching zero. Now, I'm not personally yet convinced that either of these approaches is 100% true. I think it may not be a perfectly coherent strategy one way or the other. But which do you think has the more merit?
I think that this approach is just to implement U.S. policies and Israeli policies on the ground, and talk at the same time about something that no one knows what it is. I mean, when they call it the deal of the century, and that something, you know, especially with the so-called peace process. So there, for the process, for the talking about peace, and there is something is coming, and something is formulating, and this gives the Palestinian Authority, in one hand, it gives them, you know, even though they are being excluded from it. I mean, the Mahmoud Abbas trend, but they're trying to implement it on the ground. So, for example, the issue of Jerusalem and Trump's position on this, declare Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Palestinian refugees, there is no rights of Palestinian refugees. The Palestinian sovereign state, it's also not on the table. So basically, they are implementing a strategy that on the ground, you do whatever, Israel and the U.S. do whatever they wish to do, and at the same time, promise that there is something on the horizon called the era of the century. Now, I think that the Trump doesn't have a strategy. He doesn't even have a strategy for simple issues in the United States, let alone a strategy for the Middle East. I mean, this guy is, I don't need to tell you what Trump is about. But he's definitely surrounded by a core Zionist team that is trying to provide all the conditions and make all the conditions possible for the Israeli right-wing Netanyahu, Shakir kind of a line to implement what they see fit on the ground. And at the same time, they understand that the Arab system, the Arab regime, the Arab regimes, they are not in any position to, to try to ask what they used to ask from the Obama administration and before that, like, international conferences, talk about negotiations and peace treaty and the Arab initiatives and all this. They know that this is the past, and these regimes are in crisis, and he is trying to suck the last drop of oil in the region without giving anything in return. Not for Palestinians, not for anyone. So I think that there is no strategy. There is no U.S. strategy. I've read an interview that was done by Kushner, who is supposed to be the Trump envoy to the region. And I don't think this guy knows anything about the conflict or the history of the conflict or even the history of Israel. I mean, this guy doesn't know anything. He's just a business guy who's blabbing to some Palestinian newspaper about how important to, do business and have peace and all this, vague terms and sentences. So they don't have a strategy. And because of that, I think that it becomes sometimes more dangerous, is that you cannot figure this Trump administration strategy. I mean, they don't know what they want.
What do you see as the long-term impact on the Palestinian struggle of the Great March of Return protests? Or what is the impact of that now and in the long term on the Palestinian struggle? Thank you.
Yes, I mean, those of you who visited Gaza or lived in Gaza, you know that, in previous years, before the March of Return started, we always used to ask, how come in Europe, Palestinians could march 10,000, 15,000 people for the right of return, and we barely see any real marches for return in Gaza on the Nakba Day. I mean, Gaza is known for its steadfastness and it's in the forefront of the resistance. But when it comes to the right of return, there was always this question about Gaza, and especially in the last 20 years, because when Gaza is surrounded and for people to even demonstrate and demand their right to return, they're going to have to go to the borders. And so it is very costly because we know the Israeli occupation forces reaction and what they would do. And we know also that the people of Gaza, our people in Gaza, are not going to just stand there with picket signs. They are going to have a real demonstrations, Palestinian-style demonstration. So it's very costly. And our people have shown that the wisdom of the masses. Israel, in the last 12 years, is trying to place an equation for the people in Gaza. And that equation is war and siege or siege. So you have to choose between war and siege or just siege. The marches of return have flipped this equation and said that you can impose siege, but we are going to make it difficult also for your settlers around Gaza. And so we're not going to be the only one who is living under siege or facing aggression. You're going to have also your settlers and your colonies are not going to sleep, and will be able to make noise, a lot of noise. And so that's why Israel understood that the masses of Gaza are determined to break the siege by their collective effort and by popular resistance, protected by military resistance, and vice versa. These people, the thousands who are going every Friday demanding their right to return, are the shell of the Palestinian military resistance. These are the one who protects the Palestinian resistance, and also vice versa. We saw in the last clashes between Palestinian resistance and Israel that lasted for about 48 hours. Israel knew that Palestinians in Gaza are also capable of launching missiles that could make Tel Aviv nightlife and tourist life and, comfortable life difficult. If our people is going to be living under difficult times, we are also able. Gaza is under siege, but Gaza have long arms that could reach Bir Saba, Asqalan, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Jaffa, and other places. So it is due to this resistance that it's protecting the marches to return, that we are able, that Gaza was able to place itself again into the agenda of the region and of worldwide. And we know, and you know more than I do, that it makes it easier to achieve victories, whether on the PTS front or whether in other fronts, when the resistance is alive. I mean, when there is no noise coming from Gaza, nothing happens. But when there is an active movement that is calling for the real issues, which is the right of return, people in Gaza could see their villages and their cities 15 minutes away from them, 20 minutes away from them. And so, yes, they want to return to their homes and they want to return to their villages and cities. And Israel could not argue with this as a genuine right. So that's why they talk about it in a very, the usual way that they speak about Palestinian resistance. These are Hamas people. Hamas tells them to go and die on the fence. It is the Palestinian, terrorist who tells them to go and throw rocks and Molotov cocktails and what have you on our soldiers and all this PS stuff. But the vast majority of the people who are actually participating in the marches of returns are average Palestinians who doesn't belong to political parties necessarily. Some of them are. I mean, it is an organized movement after all. In order to organize a movement, you need political parties and you need political entities. Masses just don't go and demonstrate without a certain level of organizing. And they're replacing the right of return on the agenda of the Palestinian national movement and making it very difficult for Trump or Netanyahu or even Mahmoud Abbas to sell the right of return in any negotiations or compromise. As a red line, Palestinians, consensus stand behind the marches of returns.
Just had a quick question to your remarks that the people who are imprisoned by the Zionist regime are the leaders of the Palestinian struggle. So too here we feel as though there are countless leaders who are currently in prison here in the United States. So I was just wondering if there's been any kind of effort, or perhaps there's already a program to open a dialogue between these two communities of these leaders in prison, in Zionist prisons, and also our leaders in prison here in the United States.
Yes. Again, I mean, very important question. And this is really our role. And when I say our role, I'm talking about us who are not in prison, to be the bridge between the Palestinian prisoners and political prisoners outside, in the United States and elsewhere. We can be that bridge when, we constantly send translations of articles and books to our prisoners in Palestine, things written in the by political prisoners in the Philippines and Turkey and Greece and the United States. When we translate and when we try to make the voice of the Palestinian prisoners heard also in other by other political prisoners around the world, we saw this in the hunger strikes that that our prisoners were engaged in, that we saw solidarity coming out from various different movements, political prisoners from all over the world. When there were a call for a general strike in the United States prisons, the comrades, prisoners of the Popular Front in Israeli jails issued a statement in solidarity with the general strike by prisoners in the United States and elsewhere. These are important and symbolic, ways to show solidarity. But we think that us outside the prison walls is the messengers and the bridge that we can be, and it's really our role. I mean, it's our comrades, wherever they exist in any prisons. They're struggling on a daily basis and confronting the enemy on daily basis, 24 hours a day. Then it's our extra responsibility to make this bridge happen, and it's important. And Israel is very afraid that the Israeli authority prisons, they're very afraid whenever they see a book by a comrade, from Turkey or from George Abdullah, or a poster of Mumia Abu Jamal in a comrade cell in Aufar prison. They get scared. They know that this is very significant, and that they're not alone. This is important.
Thank you so much to Comrade Khaled. Long live Palestine. Thank you very much, Comrade.